Steve Bannon appearing in federal court after surrendering to authorities. The former advisor to President Trump was charged with contempt of Congress after refusing to comply with subpoenas from the January 6th committee. Bannon emerged from the courtroom defiant.
This is going to be the misdemeanor from hell for Merrick Garland, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden. Joe Biden ordered Merrick Garland to prosecute me from the White House lawn when he got off Marine One. And we're going to go on the offense. If the administrative state wants to take me on, bring it.
Joining us now is the man who you saw standing next to Steve Bannon there, his attorney, David Schoen. He was also one of former President Donald Trump's impeachment lawyers. David, thank you for being with us this morning. I know you say that your client has to withhold documents and testimony because privilege has been invoked, but it hasn't. So why are you saying that?
Privilege has been invoked. Let me preface my comments by one thing.
But it hasn't.
As a matter of courtesy, frankly, I don't want to say to you before you beat me up, I don't watch television much, but I have to say I know that you've got a very accomplished background, very impressive both professionally and personally. So I wanted to compliment you on that. But I don't know what you mean exactly. I mean, Mr. Bannon's lawyer received a letter on behalf of former President Trump invoking the privilege, directing him not to appear, directing him not to turn over documents. That's how privilege is invoked. And as a layperson, once privilege is invoked, in my view at least, and based on the advice he got from his lawyer, Mr. Bannon had no choice. If he were to just turn over the documents or show up for the deposition, then the genie's out of the bottle, it can't be put back in. His lawyer requested that if he were to show up, that a representative of the privilege holder, the purported privilege holder, be present to be able to invoke privilege on a question-by-question basis. The House committee refused that.
Trump,
let me say this also.
I want to ask
ordinarily
David,
don't
this is
comment
so
on
important. This is so important to clear up, though,
Sure.
because formally,
Sure.
Trump has never invoked executive privilege. So you're saying that he sent a letter to the former attorney for Bannon, but he has not actually invoked formally executive privilege with the January 6th committee.
I mean, frankly, with all due respect, I disagree with you. This is how privilege is invoked. The privilege holder identifies and communicates with the person who's been directed to provide what he believes to be his privileged information, and that person acts accordingly. And by the way this is, I have to say this, I think for my duty to the court. I ordinarily don't comment on pending cases, but in this case, the Attorney General decided to put out a press release saying that this case reflects the principles of equal justice under the law. It absolutely does not. I'm sure you're aware that since 2008, 4 people have been cited for contempt by the House. Not one of them was ever prosecuted criminally, and that goes across the board in different administrations. Eric Holder, Lois Lerner, Harriet Miers, Josh Bolten. The idea that this is a crime is absolutely outrageous. The House had an alternative. They could have moved for civil enforcement. This is a discovery dispute that comes up in cases. If you believe this is a privilege, you must withhold and let a court. And Mr. Bannon's lawyer, by the way, advised the committee that if
the Trump
David, privilege claim was resolved or...
Are you comparing your client to people who worked in the executive branch in those cases?
Well, first of all, according to the Justice Department themselves, in the Office of Legal Counsel opinion, the executive privilege applies to former executive department officers. And the reason for that is obvious.
Are you talking about the 2009 Obama-era decision?
There are several OLC
Are you
opinions,
talking about the
which, by the way,
Obama-era one or
Mr.
the
Mueller,
Bush? I just want to be clear. Are you talking about the Obama-era one or the Bush-era one? You've said Obama-era.
There are several that make this point. Obama era, there's the one, the Eric Holder decision, but there's in 2009,
that doesn't make the point. That doesn't make the point. It said that the current, David, it says the current president prevails on executive privilege. You're very clear, I'm sure, on where President Biden is.
That's a completely that's a completely different issue. You're mixing apples and oranges. You're mixing apples and oranges. The first question is whether executive privilege can be invoked with respect to a conversation with a person no longer in the administration. The answer to that, according to the OLC, is absolutely yes, because the president often relies on people who have been in the administration for advice. We want those people to be able to speak freely. That's question one. The question of who prevails between the current office holder and a former president with respect to the privilege is a completely different question. But of course, in Nixon versus General Services Administration, they said that the former president also holds the privilege. It's the institutional privilege that's so important here. because we want people to be able to speak freely with an executive on matters of strategy, national security,
Yes,
and otherwise. But
just to be
again,
clear- but again,
Go ahead.
I mean, again on that, U.S. v. Nixon established even a president has legal duty to provide evidence, right? To a president, sitting president, has a duty to provide evidence of one's communications when relevant to a criminal case.
Yeah, but executive privilege is a well-known status.
Okay, so-
in the Mazars case, for example, the Supreme Court emphasized the sanctity of executive privilege. Once it's been invoked, go to a court and have a court determine whether it should apply. That's how these things are handled. Civil enforcement. The House could have gone to court, had the discovery dispute resolved by a court, and Mr. Bannon's lawyer said to the House committee, if a court orders me to comply with this and says privilege doesn't apply, I will comply. That's
So
the way
look,
it's handled. They
David-
politicize this. They politicize the criminal process by charging him criminally. I'm sorry to talk over you. Go
The
ahead.
former president, look, he may have some interesting arguments to make when it comes to executive privilege. He has not formally invoked it when it comes to testimony regarding the January 6th committee, just to be very clear on that. But Steve Bannon cannot invoke executive privilege when it is a conversation that he is having with people who are not the president, who are not part of the executive branch, Bernie Kerik, Rudy Giuliani. So those are things that are completely fair game. Why hasn't he complied?
I'm not sure why you think
Well, because then those are questions he can answer.
Mr. Bannon's
That's not
Mr.
protected
Bannon's
by
lawyer
executive
made very
privilege.
clear. There are certainly conversations. If you're talking about conversations outside of the executive branch, then clearly those are not covered by executive privilege. The central issue here is the invocation of executive privilege. That's where everything fell apart with respect, and that's what with respect
look,
to the charges
part of-
here, not appearing and not producing the document.
Part of his contempt of Congress charge is because those are, look, the committee's been clear, and you know this, David, they have been very clear that some of what they want to ask him about has nothing to do with conversations that he had with the president. So those are questions that he could, just by your admission there, answer, but he has chosen not to, which is what leads to the contempt of Congress charge.
Yeah.
Why
Here's the
that
problem.
executive privilege
Here's the
doesn't cover
problem.
that?
Well, here's the problem. This comes up regularly when privilege is at issue in depositions. Here, Mr. Bannon, there could be questions asked that have to do with privileged areas and not privileged areas. So if he were to show up and just start asking questions without a representative of the privilege holder present, privilege could be violated. All he asked was if he were to show up, could a representative of the purported privilege holder be present to invoke privilege on a question-by-question basis? He was told the committee rules do not permit that, and so he wasn't allowed to do that. So you can't just show up and then take a chance that privileged things can come up, but the privilege holder can't be there, and it's simply unfair. Look, part of that reflects on the committee. How can you possibly call an investigative committee when the chairman appointed to the committee is someone who sued President Trump personally, already decided and put in documents that President Trump was personally
David, okay, I know.
responsible for the January 6th thing,
let's
caused
focus
him
on what-
personal
please,
damage,
let's focus.
and so on.
Please, let's focus.
Let's
He
focus.
gets very-
It's
look,
relevant.
if what you're saying is that any conversation that he had with the president is something that he wanted to invoke privilege on, even though, to be clear, the president has not formally invoked it, Steve Bannon could answer questions about a myriad of conversations that he has had that did not involve the president. That is just a fact. And it sounds like a cop-out when you're saying,
could
oh,
be,
but
but I think
there could be some that are protected.
That's not an oh, but. For any person who does any kind of litigation, one would never head into a deposition where privilege is claimed and have the client just take a chance. Oh, well, maybe some of the questions be privileged, maybe they won't, but the privilege holder won't be there to have an opportunity to object. It's the privilege holder who determines whether he needs to make an objection, and then it's resolved in a court. This ought to be a civil matter resolved in a court, and Mr. Bannon's lawyer very responsibly told the committee if a court orders him to answer any of these questions, he will answer them and comply. That's all. Let a court decide. Don't charge someone criminally. Don't politicize the criminal process. That's what's happened here. It's not an investigation. They said from the start President Trump was responsible. Chairman Thompson said that he personally suffered damages. The American people deserve a fair and open-minded investigation in a matter this serious, not a committee made up of people exclusively who have prejudged the issue. That's not an investigation.